Commander Jexira pressed herself against the rocky outcropping, her violet skin blending with the shadows cast by the twin moons overhead. The reconnaissance mission to this backwater planet should have been routine. Monitor the human settlement, assess their defensive capabilities, report back to the Valdorian High Command. Simple. Clean. Beneath her station, really. Her amber eyes swept the terrain below, cataloging the crude human structures with the methodical precision drilled into her since childhood. The Valdorian Empire had produced warriors for 1,000 cycles, and she was among their finest. Disciplined, calculating, superior in every measurable way to these primitive humans who had somehow stumbled into interstellar travel. The plasma bolt that seared past her ear changed everything. Jexira rolled behind cover as the rocky ground exploded where she'd been crouching. Her hand flew to her sidearm. Tactical training overriding surprise. 3 attackers, maybe 4, using Krillian energy weapons. Not humans. This was a setup. Valdorian scum, hissed a voice in the galactic common tongue. Your empire's reach ends here. She recognized the accent immediately. Thraxian separatists. The same faction that had been harassing shipping lanes in this sector. They must have intercepted her mission parameters somehow. Jexira's jaw tightened. Intelligence failures would be addressed later, if she lived long enough. Another blast scorched the air above her head. She was pinned down, outnumbered, and her comm unit had been damaged in the initial attack. This was not how a warrior of her caliber was supposed to die, picked off by terrorists on some forgotten rock. The distinctive whine of human pulse weapons suddenly echoed across the ravine. Jexira risked a glance around her cover and saw a figure in camouflaged armor moving with surprising tactical awareness, laying down suppressing fire that sent the Thraxians scrambling for new positions. "Stay down!" the human shouted in accented Valdorian. The words rough but understandable. She watched in grudging fascination as the lone human soldier executed a flanking maneuver that would have impressed her instructors at the War College. His movements were efficient, controlled, not the clumsy brutality she'd expected from his species. Within minutes, the surviving Thraxians were in full retreat, leaving their wounded behind. The human approached cautiously, weapon lowered but ready. Jexira stepped into the open, maintaining the rigid posture demanded by her rank despite the circumstances. "Commander Jexira of the Valdorian 5th Fleet," she announced formally. "You have my acknowledgement for your intervention." The human removed his helmet, revealing a face younger than she'd expected, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that held none of the deference she was accustomed to receiving from lesser species. "Sergeant Ryan Torres, Earth Colonial Defense Force. You look like you could use some help." His casual tone grated against her sense of proper protocol. She was Valdorian nobility, trained from childhood to command respect from the moment she entered a room. Yet this human, this sergeant, spoke to her as an equal. "I was conducting a legitimate reconnaissance operation," she said stiffly. "Your assistance, while competent, was not requested." Ryan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Right. Well, those Thraxians didn't seem too concerned about the legitimacy of your operation. Mind if I ask what brought you to this particular corner of nowhere?" The question was reasonable, she admitted privately, even if his tone remained insufferably familiar. Jexira found herself studying his face, noting the steady confidence in his expression. He'd saved her life. There was no denying that uncomfortable truth. "That information is classified," she replied, though some of the starch had gone out of her voice. "However, I acknowledge the debt created by your actions." Something shifted in Ryan's expression, a flicker of amusement quickly suppressed. "Debt? Look, Commander, I'm just glad you're okay. My ship's about 10 clicks north if you need transport off-world." As they walked toward his vessel, Jexira found herself caught between ingrained superiority and an unfamiliar sense of obligation. In Valdorian culture, debts of honor were sacred, especially life debts. But how did one properly repay a human? The question would prove more complicated than she could possibly imagine. Ryan's ship was smaller than Jexira had expected, a modified cargo hauler with military upgrades that spoke of practical experience rather than imperial resources. The cramped quarters forced an intimacy that made her uncomfortable, though she maintained her rigid composure as he showed her to the passenger compartment. "It's not much," Ryan said, running a hand through his dark hair. "But the life support's solid, and we'll reach Kepler Station in about 18 hours. Jexira nodded, curtly, her amber eyes taking in every detail of the human vessel. The technology was crude but functional, much like its owner. She settled into the passenger seat with military precision, hands folded in her lap, spine straight as a ceremonial blade. "I will transfer payment for passage once we reach the station," she announced. "That's not necessary." "It is." Her tone brooked no argument. "I do not accept charity." Ryan studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself, Commander. Make yourself comfortable. I'll be on the bridge if you need anything." Alone in the cramped space, Jexira finally allowed her composure to crack slightly. The debt weighed on her like physical chains. In Valdorian society, a life debt was the most sacred of obligations, one that could only be discharged through an act of equal significance or a demonstration of profound gratitude that honored the Savior's cultural traditions. But what did she know of human traditions? Her mind drifted back to something she'd overheard months ago during a routine intelligence briefing. The communications officer had been monitoring human broadcasts from the frontier colonies, filtering for military intelligence. Most of it had been dismissed as irrelevant: entertainment programming, news reports, cultural exchanges. But one fragment had stuck with her. Strange and primitive as it seemed, a human woman on some talk show discussing relationships. "Sometimes," the woman had said with a laugh, "the best way for a woman to thank her man is to take off her clothes and show him how grateful she really is." At the time, Jexira had filed it away as evidence of human crudeness, their obsession with physical displays and emotional excess. But now, faced with an impossible debt to a human male, the memory took on new significance. Could it be some form of ritual gratitude? Humans were known for their physical expressiveness, their tendency to communicate through gesture and touch, rather than the formal protocols her people favored. Perhaps what seemed crude to Valdorian sensibilities was actually a deeply meaningful, cultural exchange among humans. She stood abruptly, pacing the small space as her tactical mind engaged the problem. The logic was sound. Ryan had shown her the ultimate respect by preserving her life. To repay that debt, she must show him equal respect by honoring his cultural traditions, however strange they might seem. Her hands moved to the fastenings of her combat armor with the same methodical precision she brought to any military operation. This was duty. This was honor. The fact that her heart was racing had nothing to do with the human's surprisingly steady gaze or the way his voice had softened when he'd asked if she was hurt. The armor came away piece by piece, revealing the form-fitting bodysuit beneath. That too was removed with ritual solemnity, her violet skin catching the soft light of the cabin. She stood straighter, shoulders back, approaching this as she would any ceremony of state. "Ryan," she called, her voice carrying the formal cadence of a military briefing. Footsteps in the corridor, then his voice from just outside the door. "Everything okay in there, Commander?" "Your presence is required," she announced. "I wish to discharge my obligation according to your cultural traditions." The door slid open, and Ryan stepped inside, words dying on his lips as he took in the sight before him. Jexira stood at attention in the center of the small space, completely nude, her amber eyes fixed on some point over his shoulder in the manner of a soldier awaiting inspection. "I remove my garments to show gratitude," she declared formally, "as is the custom of your people when a woman thanks her male protector." Ryan's face went through several shades of red. "Oh. Oh no. Commander, I think there's been a... Have I performed the ritual incorrectly?" she asked, finally meeting his eyes. "I am unfamiliar with human protocols, but I was informed this is how your women express profound gratitude." "Jesus," Ryan breathed, running both hands through his hair as he carefully kept his gaze focused on her face. Okay, this is definitely a misunderstanding. Ryan closed his eyes and turned away, his voice strained but gentle. Commander, could you please put your clothes back on? We need to talk about this. Jaxira's perfect posture wavered slightly. Have I dishonored you? I followed the protocol. As I understood it, no dishonor, Ryan said quickly, still facing away. It's just, that's not really how human gratitude works. At least not in the way you're thinking. Confusion flickered across her features as she reached for her bodysuit. The ritual precision was gone now, replaced by something that looked almost vulnerable. But the broadcast clearly stated, what broadcast? Ryan asked, finally turning back around once she was partially dressed. Intelligence intercepts from your frontier colonies. A human female discussing how women thank their males for protection. The words came out stilted, as if she were reciting from memory. She said the most meaningful gratitude involved the removal of clothing. Ryan's expression shifted from embarrassment to something approaching sympathy. Commander, I think you might have been listening to a very different kind of show than you realized. That wasn't about gratitude or cultural protocol. That was about, well, romantic relationships between people who are already intimate. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Heat rose in her violet-tinged cheeks, an unfortunate physiological response her people shared with humans. I misunderstood. It's okay, Ryan said softly, settling into the chair across from her. Cultural differences can be tricky. Hell, half the time humans can't figure out what other humans mean. Jaxira finished fastening her armor with mechanical movements, using the familiar routine to regain her composure. But something had shifted. Between them, a barrier dissolved by shared embarrassment and unexpected kindness. Your people must think us very primitive, she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. Actually, Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think your people are probably the most disciplined, honorable culture I've ever encountered. The fact that you were willing to follow what you thought was my cultural tradition, even though it made you uncomfortable, says a lot about your character. She looked up sharply, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. You do not mock me? Why, would I mock someone for trying to show respect? He smiled, and she noticed for the first time how it changed his entire face. Though I have to ask, if roles were reversed, would Valdorian males really strip naked to thank a woman who saved their lives? Despite herself, Jaxira found her lips twitching upward. The very idea would give the High Command collective apoplexy. Valdorian gratitude is typically expressed through formal declarations and ritual gifts. See? Cultural exchange, I'm learning something new. Ryan's expression grew more serious. But Commander, you don't owe me anything. I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment or gratitude rituals. That is... She paused, searching for words that didn't exist in her formal vocabulary. That is not how debts of honor work among my people. A life debt is sacred. It must be acknowledged. Then consider it acknowledged, Ryan said simply. You just did something incredibly brave and trusting, even if it was based on a misunderstanding. That takes real courage. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the awkwardness gradually fading into something warmer. Jaxira found herself studying Ryan's face, noting the laugh lines around his eyes and the small scar along his jaw. He wasn't handsome by Valdorian standards, too rough, too unpolished, but there was something compelling about his steady presence. Tell me about your world, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Earth? It's complicated. Beautiful in some places, damaged in others. We're still figuring things out, to be honest. What about Valdoris Prime? Ordered. Efficient. Every citizen knows their place and purpose from birth. The words came automatically, but as she said them, they sounded almost hollow. I was bred to be a warrior, trained from childhood to serve the Empire. Bred? Ryan's tone was carefully neutral. Genetic optimization, pairing of compatible bloodlines to produce superior offspring. She paused. Does that disturb you? Different doesn't mean disturbing, Ryan said diplomatically. But it sounds limiting. What did you want to be when you were young? Before the training? The question caught her off guard. Want? The concept was foreign, almost heretical. I never considered alternatives. Warriors serve. It is enough. But is it what you wanted? Jixira stared at him, amber eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. No one had ever asked her that question before. In her entire perfectly ordered, duty-bound existence, no one had ever wondered what Commander Jixira might want for herself. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable now. It was full of possibility, of questions neither of them had thought to ask before tonight. Hours passed as they talked, the formal barriers between them dissolving like morning frost. Ryan had replicated a meal that approximated Valdorian nutritional requirements, and they sat across from each other in the small galley, sharing stories that grew increasingly personal. So you've never questioned an order? Ryan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Not once. Jixira paused with the eating utensil halfway to her lips. Questioning orders is unthinkable. The hierarchy exists for the good of all. Each individual serves their purpose within the greater whole. But what about when the orders are wrong? Orders cannot be wrong. They come from those with greater knowledge and experience. Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying her. That must be comforting in a way. Never having to doubt, never having to wonder if you're making the right choice. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. You speak as one who has questioned and doubted, more than I'd like to admit. Ryan's smile was rueful. 3 years ago, I was ordered to evacuate a research station that was supposedly compromised by enemy infiltrators. Turned out the infiltrators were refugees, families, with children trying to escape a war zone. My commanding officer wanted to leave them behind. But you followed orders, Jixira said with certainty. No, I didn't. Ryan met her eyes steadily. I helped them escape first, then completed the evacuation. Got court-martialed for disobeying direct orders. Jixira set down her utensil with careful precision. You were punished for doing what you believed was right? For 6 months. Lost my commission. Had to rebuild my career from scratch. He shrugged. But those kids are alive. Sometimes that's worth more than following orders. The concept was so alien to everything she'd been taught that Jixira felt dizzy. Your superiors? They permitted this rebellion? Eventually they realized I'd made the right call. But it took time. Ryan reached across the small table, his fingers brushing hers. Freedom to choose your own path isn't always comfortable, but it's better than never having the choice at all. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. Valdorians rarely touched outside of combat or ceremonial contexts, but Ryan's touch was gentle, questioning rather than demanding. She didn't pull away. I would not know how to choose, she admitted quietly. I have never had to consider alternatives. You could learn. His thumb traced across her knuckles, the motion sending warmth up her arm. What would you do if you could do anything? Jixira stared at their joined hands, her mind racing. The question should have been impossible to answer, but somehow the words came anyway. I have always been curious about the ancient archives. Before the Empire, my people were scholars, philosophers. Sometimes I wonder what knowledge was lost when we became a warrior culture. You want to be a historian? Ryan said with quiet wonder. A scholar. It is foolish. It's not foolish at all. His grip tightened slightly. It's beautiful. And it's completely possible if you want it badly enough. She looked up then, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since the disastrous gratitude ritual. What she saw there made her breath catch. Not pity or amusement, but genuine respect. And something else. Something that made her pulse quicken. You are unlike any human I have studied, she said softly. You're unlike anyone I've ever met. Period. Ryan's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Valdorian or otherwise. The space between them seemed to shrink, though neither had moved. Jaxira found herself cataloging details she'd missed before. The faint stubble along Ryan's jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "This is inadvisable," she said, but made no move to pull away. "Probably," Ryan agreed, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Completely against regulations, I'd imagine, catastrophically so." But her free hand was already reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of that small scar. "Interspecies fraternization is strictly forbidden." "Good thing I'm not in the Valdorian military," Ryan murmured, turning his head, to press a kiss to her palm. The simple gesture undid something fundamental in her carefully ordered mind. With deliberate precision, she stood and moved around the small table, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders as she looked down into his upturned face. "I do not know your customs," she said, her voice barely steady. "I do not wish to misunderstand again." Ryan's hands found her waist, steadying her as she stood between his knees. "No customs this time, no protocols or traditions, just what feels right." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the clinical reproductive education she'd received. This was warmth and want and the taste of possibility on her tongue. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as years of rigid control dissolved under the gentle pressure of his lips. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed, together in the intimate space of the small galley. "Jaxira," Ryan whispered against her lips, her name soft and reverent in his voice. "Yes," she breathed, not entirely sure what she was agreeing to, only knowing that every fiber of her being was singing with rightness. When he stood, lifting her, easily in his arms, she let him carry her to his quarters without protest. For the first time in her life, Commander Jaxira chose to follow her heart instead of her orders. Jaxira woke to unfamiliar sensations, the gentle hum of ship's engines, the warmth of another body beside her, and most startling of all, a sense of profound contentment that had nothing to do with duty or honor. Ryan's arm was draped across her waist, his breathing deep and even against her shoulder. In the soft light of the ship's artificial dawn cycle, she studied his sleeping face. The sharp angles that had seemed harsh during their first meeting now appeared endearingly human. Softened by trust and exhaustion, she traced the line of his jaw with one finger, marveling at the texture of his skin, so different from her own. "Good morning," Ryan murmured without opening his eyes, his lips curving into a sleepy smile. "I was unaware that humans could sense observation while unconscious," she said, though her formal tone was undermined by the way she settled more comfortably against his side. "Special talent." He opened his eyes then, the warm brown depths immediately alert despite his lazy posture. "How are you feeling? Any regrets?" The question was carefully neutral, but Jaxira caught the underlying tension. He was prepared for her to retreat back into duty and protocol, to dismiss their night together as a temporary aberration. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Though I suspect my superiors would feel differently." Ryan's expression grew serious. "What will you tell them?" Jaxira considered this, her analytical mind examining the situation from every angle. "The truth, I suppose. That my mission was compromised. I was extracted by a human operative and delivered safely to Kepler Station." She paused. "The personal details need not appear in my official report." "And after that? Will you return to Valdoris Prime?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither quite dared to voice. Jaxira sat up, pulling the sheet around herself as she faced him fully. "I am expected to report for reassignment within the standard cycle," she said carefully. "New orders, new missions. The Empire has great plans for expansion in this sector." "That's not what I asked." Ryan sat up as well, his hand finding hers. "What do you want to do?" There it was again, that impossible question that no one had ever asked her before. But this time, lying in his arms with the taste of freedom still on her lips, the answer came more easily. "I want to see Earth," she said quietly. I want to visit your archives and libraries. I want to understand how a culture develops without rigid hierarchy, how people choose their own paths. She met his eyes. I want to understand you. Ryan's smile was radiant. That can be arranged. Earth Colonial University has one of the best xenocultural studies programs in known space. They'd probably fall over themselves to have a Valdorian scholar. I am not a scholar, I am a military commander. You're whatever you choose to be, Ryan said, bringing her hand to his lips. Starting now. The simplicity of it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Jaxira had been bred for war, trained for command, shaped by duty since her first breath. The idea that she could simply choose differently was revolutionary. My people will consider it desertion, she said, voicing her deepest fear. And my people will consider it defection, Ryan replied. Doesn't make it wrong. She studied his face, searching for doubt or deception, and finding neither. You would risk your career for me? Again? I'd risk a lot more than that. His voice was steady, certain. Last night wasn't just gratitude or curiosity, Jaxira, at least not for me. The formal words of love didn't exist in her emotional vocabulary, but she understood what he wasn't saying. She felt it too. This connection that transcended species and culture, this sense of rightness that had nothing to do with duty or protocol. I do not know how to navigate a relationship without clear orders and expectations, she admitted. Neither, do I honestly. Humans aren't exactly known for our relationship skills. Ryan's grin was self-deprecating. But we can figure it out together, one choice at a time. The ship's comm system chimed softly, indicating their approach to Kepler Station. Soon she would have to decide, return to the rigid certainty of her old life or step into the unknown with this human who saw her not as a weapon to be wielded, but as a person capable of growth and change. The station is requesting our identification codes, Ryan said, though he made no move to release her hand. Jaxira looked out the small porthole at the growing lights of the space station, then back at Ryan's expectant face. For the first time in her life, she had a real choice to make. Not which orders to follow or which duty to prioritize, but what kind of future she wanted to build. Commander Jaxira of the Valdorian Fifth Fleet requesting political asylum, she said clearly into the comm unit. Ryan's answering smile was worth every burned bridge, every broken protocol, every uncertain tomorrow that stretched ahead of them. Dordit. Colonial Defense Sergeant Ryan Torres, confirming asylum request and offering personal sponsorship for the applicant. As Kepler Station grew larger outside their window, Jaxira felt something she'd never experienced before. Anticipation for a future she would choose for herself. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The cultural misunderstanding that had brought them together had evolved into something far more precious. Genuine understanding, built not on duty or obligation, but on the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other. Free choice, she reflected, was indeed a powerful thing.